I didn't even have to open the front door to know something was wrong. The house felt different. 40 years of marriage teaches you to notice the smallest shifts, the things that don't belong. The door creaked softly as I stepped inside. Normally, I'd hear Darlene bustling around in the kitchen, humming to herself, or maybe watching one of her crime dramas on TV. But today? Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind. I placed my keys on the counter and was about to call out her name when I heard it. A laugh. Light, playful, almost flirtatious. My gut twisted. It wasn't for me. Moving quietly, I made my way to the living room. The sight stopped me dead in my tracks. Darlene was curled up on the couch, legs tucked under her, a tablet propped up in front of her on the coffee table. On the screen was a man I didn't recognize, younger, smug, and grinning like he had just won the lottery. Really? My voice cut through the room like a whip. Darlene jolted, her hand flying to the tablet as she fumbled to end the call. Tom. I didn't hear you come in. I stepped further into the room, my gaze locked on her. Who was that? Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then she tried to force a smile, but it was weak, shaky. Just someone from the gym. A friend. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A friend. That's what she was going with? After 40 years of marriage, this was the lie she chose? From the gym, I repeated slowly, my voice cold and measured. I didn't know if friends from the gym are warranted secret video calls while your husband's not home. Her face flushed, her eyes darting to the floor. It's not like that, she whispered. Oh, then what is it like? I demanded, taking another step closer. She stood up quickly, her hands outstretched as if trying to create distance. Tom, you blowing this out of proportion. It was nothing, just a casual chat. My jaw tightened. Casual. That word alone made my blood boil. I had built a life for her, for us. 40 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. And here she was, throwing it all away for a casual chat. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I opened the recording app and pointed it at her. Start talking, I said. I want the truth, and I want it recorded. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? Dead serious, I replied. If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind explaining yourself. She hesitated, her hands trembling. It's not what you think, she said finally, but the panic in her voice told me otherwise. I shook my head. Don't insult me, Darlene. Who is he? How long has this been going on? It's nothing, she repeated, tears welling up in her eyes. Just someone I talk to. That's all. The anger inside me grew sharper, more focused. 40 years, Darlene. 40 years I've been your husband, your partner, your provider. And this is how you repay me? With secrecy? Lies? Giggles for someone else? It's not like that, she cried, her voice breaking. Then pack your things, I said firmly, pocketing my phone. Her tears came in earnest now, streaming down her face as she tried to reach for me. Tom, please. Let's talk about this. We've been through so much together. Don't throw it all away over something so small. I took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. I'm not the one who threw it away, I said, my voice steady. You did that the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. You'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, you're out. She started to protest, but I turned and walked out of the room, her sobs fading as I climbed the stairs. Once inside our bedroom, I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I let myself feel the pain, the betrayal. But only for a moment. This wasn't the end of my life, far from it. This was the start of something new. For the first time in years, I felt in control. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the bedroom, replaying everything I'd seen, every word she had said. The image of that smug face on her tablet was burned into my mind. Darlene was quiet the next morning. She avoided eye contact, shuffling through the kitchen like a ghost as she made herself coffee. She didn't try to talk to me, and I didn't offer her a word. I was already moving to the next step. If there's one thing 40 years of building a life teaches you, it's how to stay steady under pressure. Emotions cloud judgment. I wasn't going to let rage drive me into making mistakes. No, I would be deliberate. Calculated. I waited until she left the house, a little earlier than usual, her car pulling out of the driveway without the typical wave goodbye. I watched from the window as she disappeared down the street. The moment she was gone, I went into action. Her tablet was still in the living room, sitting on the coffee table where she'd left it the night before. I picked it up and powered it on. She always used the same password, our wedding date. Ironically fitting. The home screen lit up, and I went straight to her messaging app. There it was. His name, Greg. The thread was long, full of messages, some going back weeks. My chest tightened as I read them, the casual flirtations escalating into something much deeper. Greg, I can't wait to see you Wednesday. Same place? Darlene, of course. Tom's got his golf league. I'm all yours. Golf league. The irony hit me like a slap. I had picked up golf after retiring to give her space during the evenings, so I wouldn't hover around the house. And this was how she used it. The conversation continued. Greg, you looked amazing last time. That dress, you killing me, duh. Darlene, stop it, you going to get me in trouble. I clenched my jaw, every muscle in my body tense. How could she reduce 40 years of marriage to this? Cheap emojis and stolen nights? But it wasn't the worst of it. Scrolling further, I found photos. A few were innocuous enough, drinks on a table, a view from some cafe. But then there was one of her. Taken from an angle I instantly recognized as not her own hand. She was smiling, radiant even, in a way I hadn't seen in years. My chest burned, anger and humiliation churning into something darker. But I didn't let it consume me. I needed to know everything before I acted. I went back to the messages and noted the time and place of their next meeting, a Wednesday, 7:30 p.m., a restaurant in town I had never heard of. It didn't matter. I'd be there. Closing the tablet, I placed it back exactly as it had been, then moved to my study. Years ago, I had installed a small safe in the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years, old documents, receipts, and, most importantly, a voice recorder. I pulled it out, dusting it off. This was going to be my insurance. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to make sure there was no way for her to twist the story. By the time Darlene came home that evening, I was calm, almost detached. She greeted me with a weak hi, and I gave her a nod, like I was barely aware of her presence. She looked relieved, probably thinking I was letting it go. Letting it go? No. I was just getting started. Time moved slower that week, every hour stretched thin under the weight of what I now knew. I carried the truth with me like a stone, heavy and unrelenting, but I wasn't going to let it crush me. If there's one thing 40 years of marriage had taught me, it was how to stay composed under pressure. Wednesday arrived, and Darlene spent the afternoon in the bathroom. The faint hum of her hairdryer carried through the house, followed by the clatter of makeup bottles on the counter. Her routine was meticulous. Every detail had to be perfect. I hadn't seen her put this much effort into her appearance in years. When she emerged, she was wearing a sleek black dress, one I didn't recognize. It clung to her figure in a way that was meant to draw attention. Her hair was pinned back elegantly, a strand left loose to frame her face. She looked stunning, and it stung. Going somewhere special? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She paused for just a moment, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face before she smiled. "Dinner with the girls," she said lightly. "We haven't seen each other in a while." "Sounds fun," I replied, nodding. "Don't stay out too late." She leaned in to kiss my cheek, a gesture so automatic it felt hollow. "I won't," she promised before grabbing her purse and heading for the door. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, fading as the door closed behind her. I waited until the sound of her car disappeared down the street before grabbing my keys. The plan was simple: follow her. The restaurant wasn't close. It was a place I hadn't even heard of before, high-end, tucked away in a part of town we rarely visited. I parked a block away and walked, keeping to the shadows. When I reached the restaurant, I stopped outside and peered through the large glass windows. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with the soft murmur of conversations and the clinking of glasses. And there she was. Darlene sat at a table near the back, a glass of wine already in her hand. She was smiling, her posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Then he appeared. The man from the tablet. Greg walked in, greeted by a hostess who led him to her table. He bent down to kiss her cheek, and she leaned into him with a smile so genuine it made my stomach turn. I stepped back, my fists clenching at my sides. But I couldn't lose control. Not yet. Pulling the voice recorder from my pocket, I pressed the button and held it close. I couldn't hear their words clearly from where I stood, but I didn't need to. Their body language told me everything. After a few moments, I took a deep breath and stepped into the restaurant. The hostess greeted me with a polite smile, but I didn't respond. My focus was fixed on the two of them. Greg was mid-sentence when he noticed me approaching. His smile faltered, confusion flashing across his face. Darlene, oblivious, continued laughing at whatever he had said until she saw the direction of his gaze. Her expression froze as her eyes locked on mine. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stopped at the edge of the table, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "Mind if I join you?" Greg's chair scraped against the floor as he shifted uncomfortably. Look." "Save it," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and placing it on the table. The recorder was still running. "I think it's time we all got properly introduced." Darlene's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her wine glass. "Tom, please, this isn't—" "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it is. I've been your husband for 40 years. I know exactly what I'm looking at." The nearby tables had gone quiet, diners turning their heads to watch the scene unfold. Greg shifted in his seat, his confidence unraveling. "Greg, is it?" I said, turning my attention to him. "I hope she told you she's married. Or was she too busy sneaking around to mention that part?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't bother. I'm not here to argue. I just wanted to make sure you both know you've been caught." I turned to Darlene, my voice low but firm. "You'll come by tomorrow to get your things. Don't expect to find me here." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my breathing and the faint hum of the engine. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the adrenaline slowly ebbing as reality set in. What had just unfolded wasn't a victory. It was a necessary step, a line I had to draw. When I pulled into the driveway, the house seemed colder somehow, emptier. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment to gather my thoughts. Everything felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. I went straight to the bedroom. Her side of the closet was still full, her scent lingering in the air. It was strange how something as simple as a familiar smell could stir up years of memories, some good, others bitter now that I knew the truth. But I didn't let myself linger. I opened the closet, grabbed an empty suitcase from the top shelf, and started packing her things. Each item I folded felt like a chapter of our life together being closed. Her dresses, her shoes, even the jewelry box I had given her on our 25th anniversary, they all went into the suitcase without a second thought. When I was done, I set the suitcase by the front door, a quiet declaration that this part of my life was over. The next step was harder. I sat down at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. For years, I had managed all of our finances. Joint accounts, credit cards, retirement funds, they were all under my name. I began separating them, ensuring that whatever she thought she had access to would no longer be within her reach. Bank accounts were frozen, her name removed from the deeds. I knew she'd come for something when she realized how serious I was. But she wasn't going to take what I had built. As I worked, my mind kept drifting back to the scene at the restaurant. The look on her face when she saw me, the way her lover squirmed under my gaze. They thought they were being clever, sneaking around, laughing at my expense. By the time I finished with the finances, it was well past midnight. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room, staring at the suitcase by the door. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about refusing to be reduced to a man who lets disrespect fester. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I didn't want to see her face when she came to get her things. I left a note taped to the suitcase. "Your things are here. Don't call. Don't text. It's done." I left the house without looking back, the weight in my chest a little lighter than it had been the day before. By the time the sun was fully up, I was already driving toward the lawyer's office. This wasn't going to be a drawn-out battle. I wanted everything finalized as quickly as possible. Jennifer Pratt came highly recommended, a specialist in cases of infidelity and divorce. Her office was sharp and professional, just like the woman herself. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately respected. "Let's cut to the chase," she said, motioning for me to sit across from her desk. "What are we dealing with?" I handed over the recordings, screenshots, and photos I had collected. "My wife," I said flatly. 40 years of marriage, and she's been sneaking around behind my back. Jennifer flipped through the folder, her expression neutral but focused. "You've done your homework. This makes things easier." She paused, looking at me. "Are you prepared for what this might mean? Financially, emotionally?" "I'm prepared for anything that doesn't involve staying married to her," I replied. Her lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Good. That makes my job easier." Over the next hour, we went through every detail. Joint accounts, assets, even our home, everything was on the table. Jennifer's plan was ruthless but fair. She laid out exactly how we could protect what was mine while ensuring Darlene didn't walk away with more than she deserved. "You have options," Jennifer said, tapping her pen against the desk. "We can push for a no-fault divorce, or we can leverage the evidence you've provided to secure a stronger settlement in your favor. It's up to you." "Whatever gets her out of my life faster," I said. Jennifer nodded, already drafting a plan. "Leave the details to me. Just be ready for the emotional fallout. She's going to push back, and it won't be pretty." I left her office feeling lighter, though not entirely relieved. This was just the beginning. When I returned home, I found the suitcase gone. She'd come and gone while I was with Jennifer. A strange sense of finality washed over me as I noticed the empty space where her things used to be. The silence in the house felt different now. It wasn't suffocating like before. It was peaceful. But I wasn't done yet. The next step was dealing with Greg. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. He had inserted himself into my life, into my marriage, and he was going to learn what that meant. Using some of the information I had pulled from their messages, I pieced together enough to find out where he worked. A small accounting firm downtown, nothing fancy, but respectable enough that a scandal would matter. The first move was simple. An anonymous tip to his boss about questionable conduct involving a client's wife. I knew it wouldn't get him fired outright, but it would put a target on his back. The kind that doesn't go away easily. I wasn't finished, though. There was more to this than just work. Greg had made a habit of preying on married women. That much was clear from the messages I'd read. He wasn't just a fling for Darlene, he was a serial manipulator. It was time to make sure his reputation followed him wherever he went. The satisfaction of the first strike was subtle but undeniable. The anonymous tip I sent to Greg's workplace wasn't just about revenge. It was about setting the stage. A man like him, so smug and sure of himself, wasn't prepared for the weight of consequences. A few days after the tip, I received an update from a contact I had quietly reached out to, a mutual friend who worked at the same firm as Greg. The fallout had begun. They pulled him into a meeting, my contact said over the phone, their voice low with curiosity. Management is investigating. They're keeping it quiet for now, but you've definitely stirred the pot. Good, I replied, keeping my tone calm. Let me know if you hear more. I hung up, feeling the first real wave of satisfaction since this whole mess began. But this was only the beginning. Later that evening, I sat in my study, going through the other pieces of information I had gathered. Greg wasn't just an accountant, he also fancied himself a bit of a social media influencer. His Instagram page was filled with photos of expensive dinners, flashy cars, and what he probably thought were inspirational quotes. But the captions told a different story. They painted a picture of a man who lived beyond his means. Lavish weekends at resorts, designer watches, all while working at a mid-tier accounting firm. It didn't take much digging to confirm what I suspected, Greg wasn't paying for all of it. I found the cracks in his perfect image. Unpaid debts. Loans taken out under questionable circumstances. Even a few vague posts from women accusing him of being manipulative and predatory. The next step was clear. I created a burner account and began piecing together a story, one rooted in the truth but embellished just enough to stick. I reached out to one of the women who had left comments on his posts, asking if she'd be willing to share her experience anonymously. She was hesitant at first but agreed when I told her I was also a victim of Greg's lies. With her input, I crafted a detailed narrative and posted it to several community forums, all tying back to Greg's public accounts. I didn't stop there. I flagged his profile to his followers with a simple comment, and not everything is as perfect as it seems. Asked Greg about his unpaid debts and ruined marriages. The results were immediate. His Instagram turned into a battlefield, with comments piling up faster than he could delete them. The next day, I received another call from my contact at his firm. "You're not going to believe this," they said. "Someone found those posts about Greg. Management is freaking out. His clients are asking questions now." I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Looks like he has some explaining to do. When Darlene called me that evening, I wasn't surprised. Her voice was tense, filled with the kind of frustration that comes when someone realizes their perfect little secret is falling apart. "Tom," she started, "I need to talk to you." I kept my tone even. "About what?" "Greg," she snapped. "Whatever you're doing, you need to stop. You've made your point." I let out a dry laugh. "My point? Darlene, I'm just getting started. You thought you could humiliate me, betray 40 years of marriage, and walk away unscathed? You're being cruel," she said, her voice breaking. "No, Darlene," I replied coldly. "I'm being thorough." I hung up before she could respond. Her betrayal had been cruel. My actions? They were justice. By the time the weekend arrived, Greg's perfect little world was starting to crumble. I got another call from my contact at his office, and this time their tone carried a hint of amusement. "Looks like Greg's in hot water," they said. "He's been suspended pending a full investigation." Nobody's saying it outright, but people are whispering about misusing company resources. Conduct issues too. "Interesting," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Let me know if you hear anything else." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, feeling a small but satisfying sense of progress. It wasn't about destroying him all at once, no, that would have been too easy. It was about making sure every piece of his life unraveled, one thread at a time. That evening, I attended a charity event at the local art gallery. It was the kind of gathering where everyone knew everyone, or at least pretended to. The room was filled with familiar faces, and neighbors, old friends, even a few people who had been at our wedding all those years ago. As I made my way to the bar, I spotted Linda, one of Darlene's closest friends. She was standing with a glass of white wine, chatting animatedly with another woman. Linda had always been a collector of gossip, someone who thrived on knowing the latest scandals. "Linda," I greeted her warmly as I approached. "It's been a while." Her eyes lit up with surprise. "Tom. I feel like I haven't seen you in ages. How's Darlene?" I paused, letting just enough tension linger in the air before answering. "I wouldn't know," I said with a faint smile. "She's been busy." Linda tilted her head, her curiosity immediately piqued. "Busy? What do you mean?" I lowered my voice slightly, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "I don't want to start rumors, but she's been spending a lot of time with a younger man. Someone named Greg. He works downtown, I think." Her jaw dropped, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. "You serious?" I shrugged. "I thought you might already know. But let's keep this between us, all right?" By the time I left the gala, I was certain Linda would have relayed the story to half the room. Within days, the whispers would spread, and Darlene's social circle would know exactly what kind of person she had become. Back home, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood settle into the quiet of the night. The air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I picked it up, her name flashed on the screen. I let it ring for a moment before answering. "Tom," Darlene's voice was sharp, filled with anger and desperation. "What the hell are you doing?" "Hello to you too," I replied calmly, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "This isn't funny," she snapped. "Do you think ruining Greg's life is going to fix anything? Do you think it'll change what happened?" "I don't care about fixing anything," I said evenly. "This isn't about fixing. It's about consequences." "People are talking about me," she exclaimed. "Do you know how humiliating this is?" "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Now you know what it feels like. Humiliation, Darlene, is a hell of a teacher." For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "Do you really hate me that much?" "Hate?" I repeated, almost laughing. "I don't hate you, Darlene. That would require caring. What I feel is disappointment. You had everything, a life we built together, and you threw it away for a man who can't even keep his job." I heard her breath hitch, but I wasn't about to let her turn this into another manipulation. "Let this be the last time you call me," I said. "We're done." Before she could respond, I ended the call and set the phone down, the weight on my chest finally beginning to lift. Greg's life was officially in free fall. The updates from my contact painted a grim picture, and management had escalated the investigation, and rumors about his extracurricular activities were spreading. Clients were pulling accounts, and even his colleagues had started to keep their distance. But I wasn't done. The final move required precision. I wanted to ensure that Greg felt the full weight of his decisions, not just at work, but in every corner of his life. I spent the next 2 days compiling everything I had, the photos, the texts, the emails. I added the public complaints I had found from other women who had crossed paths with him. It wasn't hard to piece together a pattern of manipulation and deceit that stretched far beyond his affair with Darlene. Once I had the dossier complete, I sent it anonymously to his firm's HR department. The file wasn't just a complaint, it was an undeniable case. A timeline of his misconduct, both personal and professional, wrapped in a neat little bow. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach him. A few days later, I got a call from my contact. "Tom," they began, their voice almost gleeful. "You'll want to hear this." I leaned back in my chair, letting them continue. "Greg was fired this morning. Security escorted him out of the building. Word is, HR couldn't ignore the evidence you sent in." They paused, their tone shifting slightly. "They didn't say where it came from, of course, but let's just say, the timing was interesting." I felt a deep sense of satisfaction as I ended the call. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice. Greg had played with people's lives, treating them as disposable, and now he was the one left picking up the pieces. The same evening, Darlene showed up at the house. I saw her car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. She stepped out, looking hesitant, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for a storm. When I opened the door, she stood there, clutching her purse like it was some kind of shield. "Tom," she began, her voice softer than I expected. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Talk? About what?" She sighed, her eyes searching mine. "About everything. About us. I know I messed up, but this doesn't have to be the end." I raised an eyebrow, the audacity of her words almost laughable. "You think there's only us left to save? After what you did?" "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "A terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we've been through so much together. Doesn't that count for anything?" I shook my head. "It counted, Darlene. For 40 years, it counted. But you threw it away the moment you decided to lie, cheat, and humiliate me." She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "I've already moved on," I said firmly. "You should too." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no pity. This wasn't the woman I had loved. That woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "You need to leave," I said, stepping back inside. "And don't come here again." I closed the door and locked it, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing in the quiet hallway. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. The house felt unfamiliar in its quiet, as if the air itself had shifted. It wasn't the oppressive silence that had haunted me in the weeks leading up to the confrontation, nor was it the hollow emptiness I feared would follow. This was a quieter kind of silence, one that gave me room to breathe. I stood in the doorway of the living room, my eyes scanning the space I'd known for so many years. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the walls and catching the edges of the photo frames. They hung there, undisturbed, but they felt different now, almost like relics from another life. There was the picture from our wedding day, Darlene and I, younger and full of hope. Next to it, a family photo from a summer barbecue, a son Matt grinning with a sparkler in one hand, our daughter Lily holding a plate of watermelon slices. At the center of the wall was a picture from our 30th anniversary. We were dressed up, her in a deep blue dress and me in a suit that had felt too tight at the time, both of us raising glasses of champagne. For years, these images had been comforting. Proof of the life we'd built together. But now, they felt like a reminder of something that had slipped through my fingers. I reached for the first frame, the wedding photo, and held it for a moment. I remembered that day vividly, the way her veil had caught in the breeze, how nervous we both were. Back then, I believed that love like ours was unshakable, that the promises we made would carry us through anything. Carefully, I placed the frame on the coffee table. One by one, I removed the others, stacking them neatly. Each photo told a story, but none of them could change the ending we'd come to. When the wall was bare, I carried the box to the garage. I placed it on a high shelf, out of sight but not forgotten. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about making space for what was next. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, illuminating the small details I'd long stopped noticing, at the tiny chip in the edge of the counter, the faded paint on the windowsill. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee, my phone resting beside me. Matt deserved to hear the truth from me, not secondhand or through silence. I picked up the phone and dialed his number, my hands steady as I waited for him to answer. "Dad." His voice was warm, familiar. "Hey. What's going on?" "Good morning, Matt," I said, keeping my tone measured. "I need to talk to you about something important." He hesitated, and I could hear the concern creeping into his voice. "Is everything okay?" "It is now," I replied. "But I want you to know that your mom and we're separating." The pause on the other end was long, the kind of silence that told me he was piecing things together. "Wow," he said finally. "I didn't see that coming." "It wasn't an easy decision," I admitted. "But it's the right one. For both of us." He let out a slow breath. "Are you okay?" His question caught me off guard. "I am," I said, realizing it was true. "I've had time to think things through, and I know this is what needs to happen." We talked for a while longer, making plans to meet for lunch the following week. When we hung up, I felt lighter, as if saying the words out loud had released something inside me. That afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint aroma of wood smoke. The sound of children playing echoed from a yard down the street, their laughter sharp and bright against the autumn quiet. For so long, I'd felt weighed down by the past, as if I was stuck in a story that refused to move forward. But now, as I walked, I felt something shift. The world didn't seem as heavy as it had before. I stopped at the small park at the end of the street, sitting on a bench and watching the world go by. A father pushed his daughter on a swing, her giggles filling the air. A couple walked by, their hands intertwined, their conversation soft and private. I didn't envy them. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was missing something. Instead, I felt the quiet possibility of starting over, of figuring out who I was outside of what I had lost. When I returned home, the house greeted me with a warmth I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just a place filled with memories now, it was a place where I could begin again. That evening, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. The sky was painted in deep shades of indigo, the first stars just beginning to appear. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool air wash over me. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the confrontation, the steps I'd taken to reclaim my life. It hadn't been easy. But as I raised my glass in a quiet toast, I knew it had been worth it. "To new beginnings," I murmured, the words drifting into the night. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. A few days after my call with Matt, I found myself sitting in a familiar corner booth of an old diner. This place had been a tradition for years, back when he was little and we'd come here after his Little League games. The decor hadn't changed, faded red vinyl seats, a neon clock above the counter, and the constant smell of coffee and pancakes lingering in the air. I glanced at the door just as Matt walked in. He spotted me quickly, his face lighting up as he waved. He looked taller somehow, older. Maybe I was just seeing him differently now. "Hey, Dad," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His jacket landed in a heap beside him as he grabbed a menu. "Man, it's been years since we came here." "Too long," I agreed, smiling. The waitress came by, a pad of paper already in hand. We ordered without looking at the menu, pancakes for him, coffee and eggs for me. Some habits don't change. As she left, Matt leaned back in his seat, studying me with a look I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "So," he said, crossing his arms. "How are you holding up?" I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth settling in my chest. "Honestly? I'm doing better than I expected. It's been freeing." His brow furrowed slightly. "Freeing?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "I spent so many years trying to keep everything together, trying to fix something that wasn't working. Letting it go, it's a relief." He smiled faintly, his posture relaxing. "I'm glad to hear that, Dad. You deserve to feel good about things." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time questioning what I deserved, wondering where I went wrong, that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to hear genuine support. We talked about lighter topics after that, his work, a trip he was planning with friends, and a funny story about his dog destroying a couch cushion. By the time the food arrived, it felt like we'd fallen into an old rhythm, one that hadn't been disrupted by everything that had happened. That afternoon, I returned home with a clearer head. The house greeted me with the same quiet warmth it had the past few days. It was becoming less of a reminder of what had been and more of a blank canvas, waiting for something new. I spent the rest of the day sorting through boxes in the attic. They were filled with old memories, Emma's childhood art projects, family photo albums, and keepsakes from vacations we'd taken when the kids were young. At the bottom of one box, I found an envelope marked "For later." My handwriting. Curious, I opened it and pulled out a letter I had written to myself years ago. The words were simple, but they struck a chord. "Don't forget who you are. No matter what happens, remember your worth." I sat on the floor, holding the letter in my hands, the attic around me quiet except for the faint creak of the house settling. I hadn't thought about my younger self in years, the version of me who wrote those words with hope and determination. It felt like a message from someone I needed to remember. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, the sunlight streaming through the windows. For once, I didn't feel the heaviness that had been following me for so long. Instead, I felt a pull to do something productive. I started with the backyard. It had been neglected for years, overrun with weeds and overgrown shrubs. I spent hours pulling weeds, trimming hedges, and clearing debris. It felt good to work with my hands, to see immediate results. By the time I finished, the space already looked better. I made plans to plant flowers in the spring, to turn the neglected yard into something vibrant and alive. That evening, I cooked myself a real dinner. Nothing fancy, just a steak and roasted vegetables, but it was something I hadn't done for myself in years. As I sat at the kitchen table, the house around me warm and peaceful, I realized how far I'd come. This wasn't just about surviving what had happened. It was about reclaiming my life, one small step at a time. Later that night, I returned to the porch, the whiskey in my glass catching the faint light of the stars overhead. The air was cool, carrying the smell of damp earth and the distant sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. I thought about everything that had brought me here, and the years of marriage, the betrayal, the choices I had made to take back control. It hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when the scars felt fresh. But as I sat there under the vast sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a peace. Raising my glass, I made a quiet toast to myself, to the life I was building. "Here's to new beginnings," I said softly. The stars seemed brighter that night, as if they were promising better days ahead. And for the first time, I believed them.